between the time when chaos broke Cadia and the return of the sons of the Emperor, there was a time undreamed of. And unto this, Kronan, destined to wear the jeweled crown of Aquilonia upon a troubled brow. It is I, his chronicler, who alone can tell thee of his saga. Let me tell you of the days of high adventure. Continued from Shock Attack Guns. Kronan walked purposefully along the trail to that most sacred of spots yet again. It had been an eventful week, possibly the most eventful of his life. Well, apart from the time he killed and ate the previous boss and all of his knobs, of course. But that was some time ago now, and Kronan was sure that this week would eclipse even that great moment. Well, he would if he knew what an eclipse was, of course. But the point is the same. Let us not prevaricate over the vernacular deployed, eh? Kronan did not trudge as he had before, the time he had come to this holy site to perform this titanic deed. It was unknown to him then. It was esoteric, to be feared. But things were different now. For Kronan had gone up in the world since his victory over the Humies under metal boxes. He had used that most holy of things, his faith in Gork and Mork, to permit him to foresight the genius, the Kanin, to resolve the issue that had been plaguing his tribe for many a moon. The riddle of the boxes. Using the shock attack guns, he had resolved the riddle and had cracked the nut, had defeated the Humies with Kanin. And so it was that as the glory of his victories over the Humies had spread far and wide, a miracle had happened. Truly, Kronan was blessed by the gods. For 3 of the local tribes had arrived. There had been much excitement as each made their way to the valley, for it was hoped by all that a huge scrap was in the offing. Many were disappointed, initially only of course, that they could not scrap with each other, but when the bosses met and each in turn held Kronan as the Kanin, they would follow him in his efforts against the Humies. For where one victory was gained, surely more were in the offing, and as much as the boys did love to fight each other, that was as nothing compared to the joy of fighting and beating the Humies. And so, hailed as the boss of 4 tribes now, Kronan went to sleep, both surprised and slightly concerned, if such an emotion could be considered appropriate to any orc. Perhaps perplexed would be a better description. For one thing foxed Kronan, when he happily but wearily retired for the evening. How in the name of Gork and Mork was he going to find more Kanin? He was uncertain if he could repeat the supreme display, but after expelling excess grub and voiding his bowels, Kronan decided it was an issue for the morning. And so, as the morning came, Kronan awoke as he had never awoken to a morn before. He was now the boss of 4 tribes, had literally tripled or more his power in the one feast. His mind was aware with things he had not really been aware of before. Ideas. He barely remembered the word. It was used by the Prophet at the big boss bash. Kronan knew it had something to do with Kanin. He was now ready. When he went to don his armor, he felt it was slightly snug, but that was of no concern now. He would require new armor, new muggins and whatsits, and gubbins of power, now that he was so important, so it would be traded in time. Kronan strode forth and had his knobs beat a path through the adoring crowds as he went to the runt herds. And so it was that Kronan left his knobs at the base of the mountain and processed up, ever upwards, onto the trail to his sanctum. With him was a trail of grots, all tied one to the other in a line. A dozen were in his wake as he strode. Finally Kronan reached this, the highest point of the mountain, where there was a plateau from which the entire valley could be seen, and thus he walked unto his thinking spot. He assumed the position, cross-legged, sitting at the very edge of the ledge, surveying his realm. Kronan would do things differently this time. He knew that cunning did not entirely reside just in hats, but he donned the one he had taken from the leader of the Humis, in case his previous theorem still had any weight. But Kronan had even used cunning when planning how to arrange this period of contemplation, to find even greater cunning. For Kronan had measured his last attempt at thinking, and posited that it may have been the squealing of the grot, not just the crunching on them, that had been of most use to his Herculean cogitation, thus attempting to not just replicate, but to improve on the previous session he had garnered a dozen thinking grots. As he tugged on the rope that confined them, they tried to drag backwards, but as none of them worked at the same time, some even tripping the ones closest to Kronan and then giggling insanely, the line moved forward quickly. Kronan grabbed the first grot, and with pragmatic swiftness, as it was merely a means to an end, he ripped the head off the first grot to prevent squealing too close to him, then pulled off its limbs and slowly began to munch. He could feel it. The cunning rising. The thinking grots, the thinking spot, the thinking hat. But he needed the one more thing. Kronan absently dragged on the rope, and one of the grots was then grabbed, untied, and tossed over the edge of the cliff. No. Kronan now sighed, as the squealing helped, but was not so loud as to be off-putting. As one finally finished, he would instinctively, and with no break in his majestic religious epiphany, unlatch and then lob another one over to just get the right ambience. And so, Kronan began to think. He had the Humi boxes, he knew. It had been his previous burst of cunning that had gained these precious lootable objects. Kronan was loath to ignore this previous glimpse of brilliance, but he had a concern. He had seen other boys dressed in the Humis' uniforms and carrying their weapons. Yet Humis had somehow always discerned that it was a ruse. They had mystically known that they were not Humis. Perhaps the Humis gave off a had soon evaporated at the state of the column arriving. Initially, as they got closer, it was looked upon with pity, as they moved as if all of the remaining occupants, drivers especially, had been shell-shocked, battered to the very edges of exhaustion. As the column became properly visible, it began to dawn on those officers on the gate guard that something was deeply amiss. The vehicles were not daubed with the usual paints and bits that the orcs did whenever they looted a vehicle, let alone this many, but something was definitely amiss. So as the column lumbered up to the gates and slowed down, they did not open. The lead vehicle came within spitting distance of the doors and then stopped. All behind it came to a stop after barging, jostling and bumping each other for over a minute. When the doors still did not open, the top hatch of the lead Leman Russ opened. It wasn't the fact that the officer that popped out of the hatch seemed to flop to one side, nor that he seemed to have sticks holding up his arms when he waved. It wasn't that there was no hail or request to come inside immediately. It wasn't that he did not give his rank, formation and assignment. It was more the fact that when the officer bellowed, "Open the gates!" that he was still able to do so while his head had been sewn on backwards. The order was given with the simple lowering of an upheld hand, and the gate guard then unleashed every last weapon they had into the column. In moments, the weapons of the gate whirring into position and firing down. Melters, heavy bolters, and then covering the ground with flamers when the greenskins began to dive from the tanks and transports that were exploding around them. The gate guard began to whoop with a sense of victory too early, as they seemed to be exterminating the column and its new owners. It was not until too late they noticed the 3 huge armoured squigoths rumbling out of the tree line. Previously, they would have used the said firepower to wipe them out at long range, but they had not finished off the column, and could not fire at both. The nearer danger had to be resolved, so they fired on the column. This gave the heavy weapons on the squigoths plenty of time to lumber into range and unleash their fire into the walls and parapets, hard points and fixtures of the gates and walls. Huge segments were annihilated in the first volleys. The Daka that the mech boys had managed to array on them was truly staggering. Matters got worse for the defenders as the Squigoths then took on a charge. Each ran at full pelt at the walls surrounding the gate. Not the gate itself, of course, as that had a wealth of debris in front of it that had previously been the tanks of the Astartes in guard. Their largest guns silenced, there was naught that the guard could do but concentrate all fire on one of the Squigoths at a time in an attempt to bring them down. It worked once. The heavy bolters and remaining lance cannons on the walls tore it to pieces, and it dug a huge grove into the ground as it fell and lurched to its death, still skidding due to its momentum alone. But they could not take on another before they reached the walls and crashed through. Well, the second one did. The first one got shot in the eyes and did not so much plough through the wall, but into it and fall over. But the effect was the same. The walls in two huge rents were down. The horde of boys that were following the Squigoths then rampaged through the breaches and into the city. It would not take long to subjugate the other Humies. It was a good day. Kronan had lived up to his new name. He had been cunning indeed. As he charged through the breach, Conan looked around with relish. If he kept this up, his name would go down in legend. Of no importance to Kronan, of course, but it would mean that he would be party to some of the best fighting possible. He could just feel it in his newly empowered mind. He truly was doing the work of Gork and Mork, the work of the gods, just as the prophet had promised. There was definitely something to be said for this cunning thing. But now, it was time for the brutality, his favourite bit, as he charged into the settlement to crump Humies. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baltimore, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and war gear of the Warhammer 40k universe, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. Or in this case, war! For today, we are to look at one of the largest things one might see on the board, a gargantuan creature, a veritable behemoth, the Squigoth. Part of the Squig family, they are orcoids in a very real way. Just utterly huge. But for the basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, a Squigoth is the largest species of Squig, a form of ravenous orcoid creature used by orcs as food and pack animals. Squigoths are most commonly used by pre-industrial feral orcs, but can be found amongst more technologically advanced spacefaring counterparts as well. However, this variety of Squig is just as capable as a weapon, and can sow devastation in its wake as it transports orc boys and their weapons across the battlefield. The Magos Biologius and the Adeptus Mechanicus have identified Squigoths as fungal lifeforms, though they are fairly rare and can only be grown to their larger size by the specialist breeder Pigdocs of the Snakebites clan. The size of the Squigoth is determined by the effectiveness of the feed formula the breeder gives his creature. A Squigoth's size ranges from that of a Leman Russ tank to that of a small Titan, although generally they are somewhere between these two extremes of size. Squigoths are reptilian in nature and resemble Terran dinosaurs, although there have also been reports of mammoth-like Squigoths adapted to cold climates that possess heavy fur and tusks. Squigoths used for combat will have armoured barding placed around the creature's neck and head, along with a small armoured howdah, or even a fort on the larger Squigoths, built on the creature's back. The fort carries orc boys, along with powerful orc artillery pieces, such as superlobbers. Squigoths are used as a combination of battle tank, personnel carrier, and mobile siege engine. Their size, utility, and mindless aggression appeal to the orcs on a visceral level. And much like most aspects of orc culture, Squigoths seem to be perfectly honed to suit their role and to appeal to the base tastes of their masters. In their natural unaltered states, Squigoths make excellent beasts of war. Their massive frames are draped in a thick scaled hide that provides considerable protection, and their brute strength massive tusks and crushing feet can pierce even the strongest defences. An angry Squigoth set loose on a battlefield can strike terror into even the most stalwart heart. of course. Being bestial and relatively dim-witted, squigoths are hard to train and hard to control when they are not simply eating their so-called owners. There are two recognized subspecies of squigoth, which, like most orcoid creatures, are differentiated by their size. This size is dependent upon the effectiveness of the feed formula, as we have already heard. Big squigoths. Big squigoths are the smaller and far more common breed of the beast, which stands about the size of an Imperial Leman Rust tank. Their smaller size is the result of either youth or the poor breeding methods of their orc caretakers. Gargantuan squigoths. Gargantuan squigoths are monstrous creatures, approximately the size of a small Imperial Titan. These giants are sometimes used as mounts by the most powerful of orc war bosses. Orcosaurus. Orcosaurus is the largest breed of squigoth that is used by the orcs. The Orcosaurus is larger than all other squigoths, including the Gargantuan squigoth. The Orcosaurus is usually found amongst feral orc tribes and is rarely, if ever, seen in use by the more technologically advanced orc clans. The massive creature is used as both a beast of burden and as a beast of war by the feral orcs, and the Orcosaurus is highly valued not just for the carnage it can cause in battle, but also for the prestige it can bring to the green-skinned tribe that possesses one. When the tribe marches off to war, they are accompanied by the trumpeting calls and the thundering tread of their mighty squigoths and Orcosauruses. End quote. So here we see the truly hilarious sizes of monster that inhabit the worlds of the orcs in the Warhammer universe, and the forcing of the development of the lore to encapsulate and justify larger and larger models, which I can assure you, I have no complaint about whatsoever. But it leads me on to another point. As this is War Gear Wednesday, we often briefly discuss the game and hobby, so I'd like to address just one thing. Decisions about your collection. For many have but one army, with huge amounts of variety and the ability to play multiple armies within, or to play huge sizes of game called apocalypse matches. Now these can be intensely fun and can contain your entire collection, but they are not for the faint-hearted, I can tell you. The logistics of this form of match or event can be daunting, but they really are worth it. But it does mean that they have to be arranged with far more preparation than a beer and pretzels or a matched play game. But then there is the other end of the spectrum, where people have multiple armies. Now they may have exactly the same number of troops and figures, but they are in different armies. Now I come more into the latter description. I have multiple modest to large armies, so I can pick up the army I'm in the mood for, the battle style I feel like at that time. As I have multiple armies, I can also weather the storms of a changing edition, as we are seeing now. I can fully understand that the new rules for each faction will be released over time, and that means that some armies will languish for a period without any of the new rules and new love, as we all call it. It can be a long time to wait when everyone else's army has their new toys, and you are the back of the queue. So by having multiple armies in different areas of the whole, I am more likely to have a playable, or at least not entirely outgunned army for the majority of any edition. But it does mean that I do not have the huge set pieces for each army. And in a collection of figures, for that is what they are above all else. Yes, they are portals to a dream world. A hobby extravaganza of painting and making and altering and posing. But they are a collection as much as an army. For those with only one army, you find that they have all the muggins and the biggest set-piece collectibles from that darker side of the hobby, that elite area called Forge World, where the connoisseur or mad collector can buy even more premium items at an even more premium rate. But before you even consider walking that path, just ask yourself one question. Do I want one huge army, one huge collection, with all of the toys and all painted exactingly and lovingly in the same motifs? Or do I want multiple armies that are more about the playing than the having? For it is only the rarest and most ardent and affluent of fans who can do both. Rare indeed. Whatever you do though, enjoy yourself in the decision-making process as much as its resultant direction in the hobby. For every second you are thinking about this silly world and its equally fun and silly hobby aspect, you are not worrying about your real life concerns. Sorry to harp on about that, but it really is the crux of it all to me. It's a hobby. it's supposed to be relaxing. So enjoy it. I have been Voldemort, your faithful servant. I hope you have enjoyed this introduction to the Squiggoth. If so, then please do consider liking and subscribing. If you do, then please hit the notifications bell, as I would not want you to miss out. We also have a Patreon, blah blah blah, you know the drill. But it really does keep the site going. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.